Hey, I'm Tylynn, and today I'm going to show you how to build this nightstand. I just finished a master bedroom renovation, and I actually built 2 of these nightstands as a part of the new furniture set for the new room. It's a little different style than what I usually do, but I'm super happy with how they turned out. Now, a heads up, these are pretty large nightstands, so just make sure to double check the dimensions before you build them. And other than that, you should be good to go, so let's get started. I started this project off by cutting all the lumber and plywood to size. Now you can see here that I used my miter saw. Basically I was just being lazy and didn't want to set up the guide for the circular saw for each cut. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend making the cuts this way. The blade only reaches about halfway across the board, so you have to flip it over to finish the cut from the opposite side, and it's pretty tough to get it lined up perfectly. If you're feeling risky, go for it, but the table saw or circular saw with a guide is going to give you more perfect cuts. I used pocket holes to assemble these nightstands and laid out the location for all of them in the plan set if you decide to build one. Once I had drilled the pocket holes, I assembled the side panels with wood glue and 1 1/4 inch screws. Next, I attached the side panels to the legs to form the sides of the nightstand. The side panel has a 1x2 and 2x2 along the top and bottom, so I just made sure the legs were flat on my workbench, lined the 1x2 and 2x2 up flush with them, and clamped it in place. Again, I used wood glue and pocket screws to attach everything. You'll see here that I used 2 pocket holes on the ends of each board, but I ended up having some trouble with screws running into each other when I attached the boards for the adjacent side. I updated that in the plans and would recommend just using single pocket holes so you don't run into the same issue. The joints are still plenty strong since you're using wood glue as well. Next up, I built the top and bottom shelf. So I just used my workbench to make sure the 2x2 and plywood lined up evenly, so I ended up with a flat shelf. And I would recommend clamping the 2x2 to the edge of your workbench and then just butt the plywood up against it to make sure everything lines up flat. Always make sure to wipe away any excess wood glue since it won't soak up stain. I usually just use a damp rag and scrub it off. Now the middle shelf is a little different because you attach 1x2s to the plywood instead of 2x2s, but the assembly is the same. Just make sure the boards line up evenly so you get a flat shelf. And the dreaded sanding. Just trying to keep it real over here. I sanded these before putting them all the way together since it was easier to reach some pieces before it was assembled, but it's up to you when you want to sand. I'm not exactly sure why I didn't put this 2x2 in earlier when I was assembling the rest of the sides, but I decided to put it in now before I put the sides together. So you'll see here that I used 2 pocket holes on the ends of the 2x2s again, just like earlier in the frame, but I did update that in the plans to just be 1 pocket hole screw so the screws don't hit each other when you're putting the other side of the frame in. Alright, so to put this whole nightstand frame together, I started by attaching the top and bottom shelf to one side, and then you'll see here in a minute I attached it to the opposite side. There's a couple times during this project where I'm not really sure what my thought process was, and this middle shelf is another one of those. So I decided to wait until now to put the middle shelf into place, but I would recommend putting it in place at the same time you're doing the top and bottom of the nightstand. That way you don't have to worry about trying to like shimmy it into place like I did here. But hey, live and learn, right? Next, I measured and cut the plywood for the back to fit and then closed in the drawer section. So there are a ton of different ways to build drawers, and everyone seems to have their own opinion on it, so I didn't include a specific tutorial here, but I did make a whole separate video showing a few different options. If you're an experienced builder, go with what you know. If you're new and need more instruction, I put the link for the drawer video in the description below. But however you decide to build them, just wait until you've assembled the body of the nightstand and make sure you build them to fit. Once I had built the drawers, I cut the drawer faces to fit and finished them with Minwax, gel stain, and chestnut. Gel stain works really well on pine. It's a lot thicker than regular stain, so the grain doesn't soak it in as much and get blotchy. It also doesn't leave that kind of yellowy tint that you sometimes end up with pine, so it's actually become one of my favorite go-tos for softer wood. Once the stain dried, I sealed it with a glossy polyacrylic. I like using water-based polyacrylic for projects like this because it has a little longer working time than polyurethane and is easier to get smooth. Now to install the drawers. Because the plywood is flush with the outside of the nightstand, I had to install shims for the drawer slides. I just used some scrap 1x2s and attached them where I wanted to install the slides. I made sure to countersink all the screws so they don't interfere with them. The location of the shims and drawer slides depends on the type of slides you use. I went with simple bottom mount slides since they're a little cheaper than the side mounted ball bearing ones. To install them, I marked a level line where the center of the slide will sit, then line the slides up so the level line runs down the center of the screw holes in the slide. These drawers sit inside the frame when they're closed, so I situated the slides 3/4 of an inch back from the face of the legs to account for the thickness of the drawer face. Then I installed the other half of the slide to the bottom of the drawers. I lined them up evenly with what will be the front of the drawer, so the drawer faces end up flush with the face frame when they're closed. And the moment of truth. It's always exciting when they slide. And the drawer faces fit, so that was a win-win. Okay, now for my super secret foolproof method to install the faces. I actually picked this up from my friend Brad at Fix This Build That, and it works like a charm. So first, I measure and pre-drill holes for the hardware. Then I use cards to hold the drawer face in place and drive screws through the holes I drilled for the hardware and into the drawer box. Cards work well for positioning because you can make small adjustments by just removing or adding a card. Now that the faces are attached from the front, I removed the drawer and added screws to the inside of the drawer box to attach it from the inside. Then I removed the screws from the holes for the hardware and installed the knobs. The screws that came with these knobs were too short, so I did end up using a small Forstner bit to countersink them in the inside of the drawer, and then they reached just fine. The great thing about installing drawer faces with this method is you don't end up with any extra holes or marks on the drawer fronts. And there you have it, a brand new nightstand. I hope you guys enjoyed this project, and I'll see you next time.